Good afternoon, everybody. It's John Wilkes here, Chief Executive of the Institute of Health and Social Care Management. Welcome to the Workforce Wellbeing Special Interest Group. We've got a healthy audience today, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Claire Mould as our special guest to get us going. Today, Claire is Director of Curve Strategic, and she's going to discuss the integral role of wellbeing in individual and organisational growth. She's going to look at definitions and the need to understand the independent and interdependent significance of each component of well-being. So Claire, I'm so thrilled you've agreed to kick off today's meeting. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand straight on to you, if I may.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. And hello. Good afternoon to everybody. As John said, I'm just sort of kicking off. So I'm going to be talking for about 15 to 20 minutes, absolute maximum. And then hopefully, well, what I will intend to do, my aim of this is then to leave you with some prompt points that will lead into a broader discussion for the rest of the session. And so let me just get my screen started. What I am going to do is go. Hopefully, everybody should be able to see that. And obviously, these slides are, I've already sent them over to Jade, so they're yours to have if there's any bits and pieces. And as I always say, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, or there's my details at the bottom there. So if anybody wants to pick up any of the points and talk in more detail afterwards, whether that's just because you want to have a further conversation or there's anything that you don't want to share in the wider group, I'm very, very open to that. This is all about, which is why I love working with IMS, because it's such a collaborative forum. So we will get straight on then. Now, none of this you'll be thinking, well, yeah, we all know that well-being is important. I would be really, really surprised if anybody sort of, found somebody. I think we've moved past the days where everybody think people have got to go into work or spend their lives being miserable. What today's going to be about is going that bit further to have a look, as John said, how are we really, let's get into the bones of wellbeing, because I'll be completely honest with you, I work with lots of organisations and some of them have gone on to say the fact of, oh yes, we take our team's wellbeing really, really seriously, but by that they do lovely things. They give vouchers, they do, have cake Fridays or dress down Fridays, and they do, which is all lovely, but that's not really getting to the bones of it. So we'll lead straight on then with the next slide there that shows that I'm going straight to the World Health Organization definition of mental health, because what today will be about is linking well-being right with mental health. So mental health, and that's when we're feeling strong mental health, who describe as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, work productively, hopefully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Really like that definition, but we're obviously going to flip that on its head, because this is what we want to aspire to. But what we're going to go say, well, obviously then, what happens if somebody isn't in a state of well-being? So at a time when there is a significant increase in the number of individuals struggling, really, really challenging scenarios, there's been the highest rise in self-reported worsening of mental health and well-being. And this includes anxiety, stress, depression, than there has been for years. This is going to have a fundamental impact on us as individuals, on our families, on our communities, and ultimately on the workplace. And so what we need to do is more than just a tokenistic gesture, as lovely as that is. Like I say, I have no problem with giving cake on a Friday, no problem with that at all. But this, to move forward, we need to go a little bit further. We need to establish a culture of active listening that extends from a position of wanting to understand how we can best provide genuine support. And this includes listening to others, but also, colleagues, taking the time to listen to your own needs, because I know that you'll all be depleted and exhausted through moving forward. Current research has just shown, in addition to this decrease in mental health, self-reported mental health decline, frontline health and social care professionals have been identified as one of the highest groups to be found at risk of poor mental health. I'm not telling you anything that those of you who have worked in the profession for years don't already know, but statistics are beginning to come through to really make that rigorous. And what really concerned me is a study done in 2021, so just last year, showed, and this is the bit that sticks, more than half, 57% of all UK employees feel worn out by work. That's a heavy, heavy sentence. Feel worn out by work. Well, 500,000 people in the UK now suffer from work-related stress. So imagine a culture within your organisation where people, I mean, how many of you probably feel a bit worn out by work? We know that this is a huge cost to the social purse. It costs, as we know, it costs sort of, about £9 billion a year. This is a cost to the government. This is a cost to you as individuals. This is a cost to businesses. And the reason that it's so depleted is because people are feeling emotionally exhausted. And emotional exhaustion is a state of feeling overwhelmed on a repeated daily basis. So this isn't just having an off day and a bad day where you've had a really busy week and think, oh, thank goodness it's Friday, or oh, thank goodness I've got a couple of days off. These are when you're feeling constantly anxious, depressed, feeling hopeless, powerless, irritable, a lack of motivation, nervousness, being tearful. I mention those symptoms because, and I can say this as a woman of a certain age, and having read the State of Social Care report that came out that was published on Tuesday by Skills for Care, who are the highest group of people working in social care? Women in their 40s and over. Those symptoms are very, very similar to the menopause. So that is a whole conversation that I propose that we probably get into on another time. But it's really important that we are aware of the fact that we have got the predominance of our workforce feeling emotionally exhausted, demonstrating symptoms on top of symptoms that them going through the menopause is already making them feel. This doesn't bode well for us, does it, unless we start doing something about it. So what we need to do is really understand why this is happening. And what I'm going to do is throw in a little bit of neurology now, just to make us think of why this is happening from a scientific perspective, but also why we need to take this more seriously, why we can't just appease this with a pamper voucher and and some chocolates. Again, as nice as they are. Right, so just very, very quickly then, and I'm not going to go into a whole neurological presentation, but the amygdala part of our brain, the bit at the right at the back of it, is specialised for input and processing of emotion, while the hippocampus is essential for long-term memory. Now, the optimum state when we're working on all sort of firing on all cylinders is where they work together. So the emotional bit of your brain, the amygdala, sends chemicals into the cognitive part of your brain, which then works in a collaborative way into the hippocampus. So you've got long-term memory there. That's when we're firing on all cylinders. Now, if people are beginning to feel stressed, two things happen. If it's just slightly depleted, those chemicals stop. So that's when you get a little bit fuzzy, and that's when you know, you just need to think, actually, I just need to go and clear my head for a bit, or I'll come back to this in the morning when I've had a good night's sleep, or I'll come back to this when I've had a walk. That's why when we're out walking the dog, or when John's surfing, that's when suddenly something comes to him. When, you know, when your mind's clear, that thing that you can't think of. Now, what we're talking about, if people are getting into that really intensely emotionally exhausted side, is the amygdala senses a greater threat than that. So what the amygdala does is it releases stress hormones that prepare the body to fight. It's either fight or flight, okay? And so this is when, you know, what will happen is then the prefrontal lobes will be at odds with the amygdala, because it won't be thinking. It's what's called, you know, neurological hijacking. It won't go into your long-term cognizance where you're thinking logically. It will suddenly have an immediate response to something. Because what happens is those hormones, cortisol, go into your muscles, your pupils become dilated, so you can see more. You know, it literally is, you are all, you know, raring and ready to go, which, if there is a genuine danger, is absolutely fine. Which is why you hear tales of somebody, if a house is burning down, someone's able to pull somebody out that's twice their weight, or suddenly finds it and think, gosh, I don't know what came over me, I was just able to do it. We've heard tales of people that have been able to suddenly lift up a car and things. This is when the amygdala is doing its job. Now, the trouble is, if we are emotionally exhausted and we get hijacked, what happens then is that you're not responding in a rational way to a scenario that isn't life-threatening. Because normally what happens, if you get spooked a little bit, then something happens, and then you think, oh no, and the cognizance comes in and you think, oh right, actually that was over. So for example, I went to an early gym session this morning, so it's still dark. I was on the treadmill, and just the way that it came, it looked, because of the reflections, like somebody, and there was hardly anyone in the gym, like this man was walking up right behind me. So I sort of jumped like that, and then I realised it was just a reflection, that it was somebody else walking to come in the gym, but the way that the light fell. So I immediately went to that panic. I demonstrated all the signals that you get. So I sort of got a bit sweaty, and my heart raced a little bit. But within 10 seconds, I'd composed myself, and I thought, oh no, actually, let's think logically about it. He's outside. He's just reflected through the window. And that's what normally happens. But if you are emotionally exhausted, what happens is you make unrealistic, unrealistic responses to this. So we end up with people responding in a way that they regret later. This is why in meetings, if people are going into meetings and they're getting feeling as if they're worn out, feeling as if they're down, it's really difficult to collaborate with them. That's why they become regressive. And sometimes it might be with us, that you will react in a manner that you can be aggressive, argumentative, sometimes violent, but dramatically out of proportion to the response that's required. And then what happens is people end up regretting how they have behaved, and it really upsets things. And all of this can be prevented if we start to address it before this spiral of decline starts to happen. So what we're going to do for the final bit of this prompt is have a think about some of those things, because we're going to be focusing on the positive things we can do in our wider conversation of how we in our workplaces and in our home lives can start thinking about the key elements of wellness that we need to be aware of, and then things that we need to put in place. So we need to think of the physical side of what's going on. You know, so the lifestyle, what lifestyle are we putting on ourselves that affect the functioning of our bodies, and what lifestyle choices are we imposing on the individuals that we work with? There is a reason why you hear about people working long shifts. Oh, well, I haven't even had a chance to grab anything to eat today. You know, people need to be refueled. Think about shift patterns. Think about your patterns. Think about just the downside of Zoom when we end up going back to back to back. How many of you here, and this is a rhetorical question, but I want you to think about it, have done a day of Zoom meetings and you suddenly get to 4 o'clock and you think, I haven't even had a glass of water. Haven't even had a glass of water since 8 o'clock this morning. So I've gone back to back to back. How productive were you in those last sessions? I did it I've been at the care show this week, which was absolutely fantastic. But at the end of the first day, I came over, had really bad headache, and I thought, yeah, well, you're an absolute fool, because you've been, you've been chatting to people, you've been going to seminar to seminar, and you haven't even had, you haven't had a glass of water. You're not looking up yourself, so we're not functioning effectively. Our emotional wellness, how we can reflect on what we need to function, social, spiritual, intellectual, economic. I won't go into all of these now, but you get the idea of what we need to do. And I put economic in there because in the current climate, when we are thinking about a cost of living crisis, are people making choices to work overtime or take on another job because they feel they can't afford not to? These are all things that we need to be aware of. So what can we start thinking about to start addressing this? So the first thing is, we've got to be honest with ourselves. How well are we connecting with our teams? And that's actually talking and listening to others in the moment. What is your barometer at the moment for how your team is? Not at all, actually, I always send a monthly newsletter, or I always do a one-to-one with everyone. That's absolutely fantastic. But actually, how connected are you in the moment? We all know our own lives. When you finish work, no matter how long a day, stuff happens between you finishing work and you starting work the next day. How well are you connected with what is going on in other people's lives? Be active. Are we exploring ways that we and colleagues can actually be actively involved in parts of the day that they actually really, really enjoy? And again, I'm not talking about everybody sort of saying, right, let's have a singing session. All of us certain parts of our jobs that we enjoy more than others. So are you really, really actively aware of what your colleagues are doing that they really, really like? Some people might think, actually, I'm really quite happy doing a risk assessment. Some people like doing one-to-one. Some people like being in charge of medication. There's lots of different things. Are people actively involved in something? So we're doing something every day that actually gives us joy. And again, I don't mean that in a really saccharine way. I mean, so it's not a worn out, dirgy day. Taking notice. Do we take notice of what is actually going on? Those prompts, because if we're worn down as well, we're not taking notice of those things that are going on. Keeping learning. Are we encouraging our teams to always be developing? Are we always developing, or are we always putting our teams ahead of where we are? And then the final one, give. Give of yourself, give people your time, your words, your wisdom, your presence. Because I know a lot of people say, oh, well, I haven't got time to do that. I can categorically tell you, well-being aside, if you spend time doing that, it'll save time on performance management issues later on down the line. I'm galloping through because these are all things we're going to be returning to and opening up in the wider discussion, because I know you'll have a phenomenal amount to feed in yourselves. So all of that can be combined in this genuine, active listening. Actually practicing, continually reflecting our ability to listen, to enable interactions to result in increased productivity, organisational growth, and the well-being. How often do we actually actively listen? It's that whole Stephen Covey thing that we go into a communication seeking to understand more than going into it saying, I want to be understood. How many of us, hold my hands up, I do this, wait politely till you've done the how are you, right, and now I'll get my point across. this is what I want to get out of this. And I'm always formulating my response before you finished your sentence. It's about seeking to be understood. So what we need to do is we need to take action by identifying staff learning and development needs, specifically in response to where they are with regard to mental health, building prevention and mental health promotion into the day-to-day work, so people know where they can be supported, so it becomes part of the natural dialogue. Work collaboratively with colleagues and other team members, so we can feel that we are all part of a greater team. Provide and promote healthier lifestyle choices, and that's just rather, if we've organised, let's go out and do a walking meeting, right? I tell you what, come on everybody, away from your desk, go and have some lunch now. If you're noticing people are depleted during a meeting, say, right, should we just call time on this and just go and have, just go out and go and have a walk around, stretch your legs for a bit, and then come back. Working with other services to see actually how we can work in collaboration. We don't all have to do this on our own. And then the final bit, which is going to lead now into the question that I particularly want us to explore, is provide a psychologically safe environment. Now, a psychologically safe environment has been highlighted as a critical factor in understanding team voices, learning. A psychologically safe environment is an environment where people feel confident to say, actually, I don't understand this, or actually, do you know what, I'm really struggling at the moment, or actually, I've got real childcare problems at the moment, or carer problems. Is it all right if I leave early? That people can go into meetings and feel that their voices are being heard, rather than feeling as if, they're going to go in and then get told. Anne Edmondson says that, a psychologically safe environment is one that has a sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish somebody for speaking up. This is what we need to be able to create in our workforces so we can move forward. And what I want us to start thinking about, in addition to those other bits, I've just tried to plant lots and lots of different bits and pieces, but us to start exploring today, is our workplace a psychologically safe environment? So often I work with leaders and managers who turn around and say, well, yeah, I've got an open door policy. Oh, yes, people can come and speak to me. Oh, yes, well, anybody can say anything. But how do you know that? How do we know? How much active listening have we done? How do we know how our staff are feeling? So I want us to feel, as to go on to start considering that what are the challenges of establishing and embedding a psychologically safe work environment, because it is challenging to suddenly set it up. But it is really, really important, because we've got to demonstrate to these individuals that this is an environment that we can develop. We've got to demonstrate to ourselves. So that's been a really quick canter through, but the delight of these SIG groups is actually the conversation that comes afterwards. So all I've done is planted some seeds for you to now open up to a wider conversation that hopefully by the end of the session we can all leave with some prompt points of what we can do to make our environments more psychologically safe. So back to you then, John, for the moment to open up to the wider group. I'll stop sharing.